The bodies are burnt inside the vehicle.
This is a whole new level of cartel violence.
Just for the record, Nita and 4 of my grandchildren are burnt and shot up.
We tend to think cartels just kill each other in an endless, brutal turf war, but the reality is much darker. Every year, tens of thousands of people disappear in Mexico, and among sicarios and police officers are civilians, including Americans settled in Mexico or visiting on a holiday. Few things are worse than taking your kids on a holiday and watching them burn as the cartel set fire to their car. In today's video, we'll explore how cartels got so bad in Mexico, how brutal violence makes a profit, and the heartbreaking stories of American families killed by cartels. Warning though, graphic details of torture and murder are ahead. When we think of Mexico, the first things that come to mind are great food, great beaches, and lots of violence.
Here's a sobering stat. Despite the fact that El Chapo has been in prison now for more than 2 years, the violence in Mexico has actually increased, breaking a record 31,174 murders in 2017.
Sadly, Mexico has such a culture of violence that many people are accustomed to seeing shootouts and even bodies. Even worse, there's a culture of glorifying cartel violence. The narcorridos, a play on the Mexican genre corrido, are songs that paint drug lords as badass heroes. You can also buy El Chapo hats, but these are people that killed thousands and destroyed the lives of millions. So why would anyone glorify cartels in the country most affected by them? Well, cartel violence in Mexico started very early. In 1971, President Richard Nixon declared war on drugs. He was the first to do so. Many more presidents would follow. But you know how the white powder epidemic skyrocketed in the US in the 1970s? Pablo Escobar had a role to play in it, and the United States was desperate to curb this addiction and the violence that came with the drug trade. Sadly, not one war on drugs proved effective. In fact, after it officially started in Mexico in 2006, violence has only been on the rise. Why? Well, drug traffickers won't just stop producing or selling just because the government is threatening them with more prison time. They already know what they're doing is illegal, and the profits are so big, no threat is going to intimidate the kingpins. Also, the profits are so big that the government becomes interested in them. Reportedly, the CIA, the FBI, and even the DEA have allowed drugs to come into the US with various motivations. Catch the big fish, stop another type of drug from reaching the country, etc. And in Mexico, several high-ranking politicians are in the cartels' pockets, earning a percentage of everything they make. So the war on drugs is not without some serious flaws. Mexico's International Revolutionary Party, or the PRI, is notoriously intertwined with the Mexican mafia. The PRI has controlled Mexico's government for 6 decades and has consistently been accused of super high-level corruption linked to drug trafficking and organized crime. The ex-president's brother, Raul Salinas de Gortari, was arrested in 1995 after actively collaborating with the Gulf Cartel for over a decade. He made outrageous sums of money by protecting the cartel, all while posing as a clean political figure. But back then, violence was at a much lower rate than it is today. You see, the PRI had a sort of unwritten pact with the cartels. Cause no ruckus in the country and we allow you to do your business. When the US started putting pressure on Mexico to sort out its drug problem, the PRI seemed to carry out such missions, filming and reporting success after success. But in reality, they were maintaining a good relationship with the cartels and presenting a few minor success stories to make it look like they were actively fighting them. This way, the government increased in wealth and power over the decades, and the US left Mexico alone. It was only when the cartels actually started posing a threat to Mexico's population that the government thought they'd better start that war on drugs. By the 2000s, cartels got so rich that they had legit influence over the government and its people. Sadly, it was a bit too late to curb their growth now. The war on drugs means more violence against cartels, but what do cartels know better than violence? They were better at it than the government and even the Mexican military. So now, Mexico is an open war zone. In 2000, the National Action Party, or the PAN, took over the government after President Vicente Fox was elected. Vicente Fox was first to actually side with the US and launch a program against Mexican cartels. He also gave the military more power, allowing them to intervene in various situations during peace times. Cartel kingpins started getting arrested left and right. For a few years, it really seemed like cartels would come to an end. You know what happened instead? Every time a cartel leader would get arrested, the cartel would crumble into smaller factions, all at war with each other. Just like the Guadalajara crumbled in 1989, allowing the Sinaloa, Tijuana, and Juarez cartels to grow and kill each other. Now there were dozens of such cases happening everywhere throughout Mexico. In a way, the war on drugs was inevitable, but it was also the sole cause for the terrible turf wars we see today. After Vicente Fox, President Felipe Calderón took over, and the violence got even worse. It was Calderón who announced an official war on drugs and gave the green light to every single government resource for this war. Still, the government was outnumbered and outpowered. Then Enrique Peña Nieto took power, and he was part of the PRI. Take a look at what happened in Mexico while he was president. Yep, the violence skyrocketed to unprecedented levels. Year after year, the record for number of homicides in Mexico renewed. Almost 40,000 were killed in 2018. This was in part due to the terrifying rise of the Jalisco New Generation cartel. El Mencho's CJNG was so senselessly violent and so brutal that it went straight after the government with all its resources. They also torture, kill, and leave decapitated bodies in the streets to instill fear in anyone who might think of crossing them. This is how he talks to the police.
Relaja tus putas partidas, si no te voy a partir tu madre 10 toda tu bola de perros. Te tengo identificado 30 güeyes. Hasta tus putos perros te voy a matar si no te relajas, güey. ¿Cómo ves?
Ya está, señor, ahorita los bajo.
El Mencho doesn't believe in bribery like most cartels do. He just threatens people into submission. And if they don't comply, he makes them suffer a fate worse than death.
Tú ya sabes con quién traes la bronca. Para que sepas, aquí seguimos buscándote y no quitaremos el dedo del renglón.
By now, it's not even about money anymore. It's about power. El Mencho has access to the highest-ranking politicians using fear as leverage.
And all that violence is only to have leverage in the negotiations with the government, with politicians, right? They create these chaos to go and sit with the local politicians and say like, okay, do you want more or shall we negotiate this stuff?
Meanwhile, Mexico's military is afraid of the CJNG. They have good enough equipment to follow them and kill them on command.
¿Un dron o qué?
Ese mero.
¿Dónde está el dron?
Está volando derecho arriba.
Hay un dron.
In 2018, a new president was elected in Mexico, and he seemed to promise a serious change. Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Obrador is a descendant of Spanish and indigenous parents, and his popularity grew in Mexico over his decades in the government.
Que yo hable de abrazos y no balazos. Yo digo que voy a seguir sosteniendo lo mismo. ¿Ustedes creen que solo deteniendo a capos se va a resolver el problema?
One of the reasons he was so popular was his anti-military discourse. Obrador said, of course, Mexico will do its best to arrest drug lords, but the priority is to address the cause. However, nothing was done to address the cause, and the homicide rates between 2019 and 2023 stayed at an all-time high, with just a minor decrease in 2018. And Obrador's discourse has changed drastically. Here's a short example. In October 2019, the Mexican military and the DEA led a huge operation to arrest Ovidio Guzman, one of El Chapo's eldest and most trusted sons.
They now say this drug lord, nicknamed the Mouse, has ordered the murders of informants, a rival drug trafficker, and a popular Mexican singer who refused to perform at his wedding.
Sadly, El Chapo groomed his sons to take over his business after his arrest, and they grew to be just as violent, if not worse, than their father. The Sinaloa cartel grew in size, power, wealth, and violence since El Chapo's arrest in 2016. This just goes to show that 4 Chapitos are worse than 1 Chapo.
They are known as Los Chapitos, the 4 most trusted sons of the world's most notorious drug kingpin.
Clearly, the Mexican government had to arrest Los Chapitos if they were to reduce the Sinaloa cartel's power. In 2019, they went after Ivan and Ovidio. On October 17th, the Mexican authorities localized both brothers. First, they went after Ivan, but he was a minute quicker than the military. He escaped and rallied up his army, hundreds of sicarios armed to their teeth. In the early hours of the morning, the military surrounded Ovidio's house. Ovidio initially started shooting at the officers. Of course, the officers fired back, and Ovidio soon realized he was heavily outnumbered. So he came out with his hands up.
Pase, por favor, pase, por favor. Salgan los tres. Tranquilo. Aquí, señor. Tranquilo. Listo. Ven aquí, ¿traes armas?
But news of his arrest traveled fast. Within minutes, Ivan's giant sicario army and other thousands of Sinaloa soldiers descended upon the Mexican military. Shockingly, it was Ovidio who seemed to try to stop it.
¿Tienes gente adentro?
No, no tengo. Son mis hijas.
Que paren. Diles que paren todo.
Ya no quiero que haya desmadre.
But his efforts were too late. It was complete bloodshed. The sicarios released cartel prisoners, set fires to cars to block important roads, and invaded the local airport. Trade and travel were completely stopped in the Sinaloa region for hours. 7 officers and 1 civilian were killed, and the surviving civilians were instructed to hide in their homes. The cartels were imposing a curfew on the town until Ovidio would be released. Sadly, it worked. President Obrador ordered Ovidio's immediate release to prevent further loss of life. The decision was taken to protect civilians. You cannot fight fire with fire. We don't want deaths. We do not want war. Yeah, hugs, not bullets. But can you hug someone who's pointing a gun at your head? Obrador's decision sent the wrong message. The authorities are easily intimidated and the cartel is in control. Falco Arntz, senior analyst for the International Crisis Group in Mexico, said the release of Ovidio Guzman set a dangerous precedent and sent a message that the state itself, including the army, could be blackmailed and was not in control. So yeah, by 2023, President Obrador had done a 180 on his tactic.
The Mexican president has defended the military operation that captured a drug cartel leader, Ovidio Guzman, the son of jailed drug trafficker El Chapo. Violence erupted in Culiacan, a stronghold of the cartel. At least 19 members of the Sinaloa cartel and 10 members of the military were killed.
In early January 2023, Ovidio was finally arrested and jailed, even as the Sinaloa cartel rained hell upon civilians and officers again. 29 people died this time, even more than the first time. The cartel soldiers went into the Culiacan airport and shot at civilian planes.
These criminal organizations shot with weapons at aircraft from the Mexican Air Force and from commercial airlines, and at the international Culiacan airport facilities.
This time, Obrador spoke for the operation.
We regret the loss of lives of those who died while carrying out their jobs. We also regret other losses.
Also, was the operation timed in order to appease the U.S.?
Violence broke out across the state following the arrest of one of the leaders of an infamous criminal gang. Ovidio Guzman Lopez is the son of the notorious drug lord dubbed El Chapo. The arrest comes just days before US President Joe Biden is due to visit Mexico.
Yep, the U.S. is far from done when it comes to fighting Mexican cartels, and the government wants to see Mexico fighting too. According to CNN, Ovidio's arrest was also a way for the Mexican government to show the U.S. that they are now in control. They will not be bribed or intimidated by the cartels anymore. It also diffuses the power behind any ask from the Biden administration to stem the tide of fentanyl and other narcotics across the border. Clearly, President Obrador changed his peace tactics after he realized hugs weren't doing anything to curb the rampant homicide rate. Side note, I don't want to mock anyone's peaceful discourse. It's really sad that Mexico is such a violent place and only more violence can stop it. But after ordering tanks and doubling the size of the military, Obrador managed to bring the homicide rate down by 4% in 2021. But as the Mexican government is arming up, so are the cartels.
And in July, footage would emerge of that CJNG convoy. These gunmen call themselves the elite group and pledge allegiance to El Mencho.
They dressed as properly military. They also have these high caliber guns. They have what they call los monstruos, which are really basically what man-made tanks, you know?
Entire towns are reduced to ashes in the war on drugs.
El Aguaje se convirtió en un pueblo fantasma. Las casas pues ya no son las mismas, todas están balaceadas. Antes aquí es donde estaban los Jaliscos. Esto era la barricada de ellos.
Brutal cartels like the CJNG or the Sinaloa won't back down simply because the president ordered tanks. They will get even bigger tanks, and so on and so forth. And while the murder rate has dropped down by a little bit, something else has been on the rise steadily since 2019: kidnapping cases. This is the sad story of the cartel violence in Mexico. It's not just sicarios who are affected. It would be easy to not care if all that died were cartel members fighting each other over territory, money, and power. Well, not easy, but you know what I'm saying. Heartbreakingly, lots of civilians lose their lives on a daily basis. Others have to live with the memory of losing their children to murder.
Y les digo a mis hijos, levántense, les digo, porque quién sabe qué está pasando en la calle. Digo, vístanse y nos salimos. Y todo empezó a tronar, ya no había luz, todo empezó a tronar, tanques, camionetas. Pero sí, ahí perdí a mis niños y a mi hija.
Other people who get caught in the thick of it are from the United States.
There's 5 kids sitting on the side of the road, got shot in the mouth, shot in the foot, shot in the leg.
They just started hitting the car at first, like with a bunch of bullets.
This is for the record. Nita and 4 of my grandchildren are burnt and shot up.
In 2020, 3 women and 6 children were gunned down and set on fire by cartel sicarios. They were all part of the same Mormon family. It was a 13-year-old boy called Devin, one of the surviving brothers, who rescued all the others after he ran 14 miles to get help.
Going through my mind was to get help because every one of them were bleeding really bad, so I was trying to get in a rush to get there.
The 17 family members were traveling in the Sonora region in 3 separate cars. The family had settled in Mexico and was living just a few miles from the place where they were murdered. One of the cars was stopped and an army of cartel assassins surrounded it. They shot dozens of bullets at the car before setting it on fire. Donna, the mother, and 2 of her children died in the fire.
Afterwards, they got us out of the car and they just got us on the floor and then they drove off.
Devin saved his little brother, sat him in a safe place, then walked home to ask for help. Imagine the terror, grief, and shock he felt on his long walk.
Walking all those miles was if there was anybody else out there trying to shoot me or following me. I was trying to hide myself as best I could under a bush.
After Devin got home, his father left a message on the family's group.
We have Devin. He ran all the way home, and he says that the rest of the kids that are still alive are up under a tree.
Christina's baby is alive. Praise God. We got faith. She is alive.
But Christina had died, and so had 8 other people, 3 mothers and 6 children. And the way they died is simply stomach-turning. You might ask, why did this family live in a border region known for cartel crime? Well, it wasn't like that when they moved to Mexico.
When I first moved there, our little farm there was a paradise for children, for families. And we lived really, really safe.
Today, though, the Sonora Mountain region is perfect for cartels. It's isolated from towns and police. They can produce drugs and commit murders as they please. Meanwhile, more and more people suffer at their hands.
Not only have I lost a wife and 2 children, but I'm having to move the rest of my family with really no place to go at this point.
The news traveled fast in the United States. It's almost as if a U.S. citizen had to die for Americans to realize just how brutal the situation is south of the border. At the time, President Donald Trump tweeted, "If Mexico needs or requests help in cleaning out these monsters, the United States stand ready, willing and able to get involved and do the job quickly and effectively." This is the time for Mexico, with the help of the United States, to wage war on the drug cartels and wipe them off the face of the earth. President Obrador said Mexico can handle the situation on its own.
I'll speak with President Trump to thank him for his support and see if in cooperation agreements there's the possibility of getting help in cases where it's necessary. I don't think we need the intervention of a foreign government to deal with these cases.
But this is far from the only case of American families kidnapped or murdered in Mexico over the last 5 years.
Helpless families are being innocently killed down there. It's not just got caught in gunfire in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is a whole new level of cartel violence.
The massacre of this Mormon family was most likely a case of mistaken identity, but other families are targeted directly. Sometimes cartels target American families for financial gain. They may kidnap people to demand ransom from their relatives, seeking to exploit their financial resources. In other cases, families may be caught in the crossfire or territorial disputes between rival cartels, or become victims of extortion or forced recruitment.
We turned down this little side road because we was gonna see if that led us to the destination and we was gonna turn around. We heard a car beat the horn and pulled around us. Zendel was in the back seat. He said, "Don't stop."
In 2023, Latanya and Eric miraculously survived a harrowing kidnapping. But when their car was stopped, their friends Zendel and Shaid tried to run, and they were killed on sight.
They jumped out to run, and they were gunned down.
The 4 were traveling from South Carolina to Matamoros, Mexico, where one of them was bound to have surgery. Shortly after crossing the border, their car was stopped and all hell broke loose. Latanya and Eric were forced into the back of a cartel's truck at gunpoint. Their 2 friends were bleeding to death on the ground. They were still alive, struggling not to pass out, but Latavia and Eric couldn't do anything to save them.
He was hit 2 times and big chunks of meat was gone out of him.
The 2 dying men were put in the back of the truck too, but no one tended to them after they arrived. The 4 friends were taken to a safe house filled with guns. Several men wearing masks interrogated them for hours. Latanya and Eric didn't know what they wanted from them. Finally, the sicarios stopped interrogating them. Surprisingly, they came to the realization that the two were of no help and decided not to kill them, for the moment. Instead, they offered them treatment, but that implied stitching Eric's foot without anesthesia.
They just stitched it up?
Right.
Did they give you...
No pain medicine or nothing.
Later that day, all the stitches burst out. The bullet was still inside his leg. At this point, the two were wondering if this was treatment or torture. After all, their two friends, one of which was their brother, was shot and left to die. Why did they choose to keep them alive? In the evening, Latanya saw one of the sicarios watching something on his phone. When she asked him what he was watching, he showed her the video of them getting kidnapped earlier that day.
I just started crying. It's like I'm never going home.
But by now, the kidnapping video had reached the news outlets and, of course, the police, so they were going home. However, it took a while until they were rescued, and it's hard to even tell all the horrible things that happened to them while they waited.
They tried to make us have sex with each other, but
we told them we was brothers and sisters.
Brother and sister, and that she was pregnant.
Did you recover from that trauma? On Tuesday, 4 days after the attack, the Americans were found by Mexican authorities. Miss McGee and Mr. Williams were alive and were sent back to the United States that same day. Mr. Woodward and Mr. Brown were dead. Their bodies were returned to the U.S. authorities on Thursday, the state prosecutor Irving Barrios said on Twitter. It's unclear whether this was a case of mistaken identity or they were kidnapped for ransom. One theory states that the sicarios mistook them for Haitian drug smugglers, hence the hours-long interrogation. But this hasn't been confirmed. 2 days after they were rescued, a strange apology letter written by the local cartel was found. The Gulf Cartel Scorpion Group strongly condemns the events of Friday, March 3rd, in which, unfortunately, an innocent working mother died and 4 American citizens were kidnapped, of which 2 died. Indeed, that day, a 33-year-old woman named Arely Pablo Servando was also killed as collateral damage in the shootout. The Gulf Cartel claimed that the 5 sicarios operated against the rules of the cartel and showed a lack of discipline, which is unusual for the cartel. Whether that's true, well, it's up to you to decide. But the apology letter might be an attempt to protect the cartel against the DEA. The 5 sicarios were handed over to the police as a way of apologizing to the US. It's still very rare that Americans are targeted by cartels. It's precisely because it attracts attention like this, and the repercussions can be much bigger for the attackers than if there were only Mexican casualties involved. This is quite heartbreaking. All lives are equally valuable. This again boils down to the decades-long corruption problem in Mexico. The government simply doesn't do much to protect its people from cartel violence. As long as cartels are making more money than the government, officials will be interested to profit off them. And this is the exact opposite of protecting people from cartels. The government ends up protecting the cartel while millions of people lose their lives and loved ones in turf fights and wars. If hugs not bullets isn't effective, and the brutal war on drugs isn't either, what is the solution to curb this pain and suffering? Hey, thanks for watching. What do you think about cartel violence in Mexico? Do you know other stories of Americans attacked in Mexico? Let me know in a comment, and before you leave, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell button. That way you never miss another episode. See you next time, and stay safe.